Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we got an exciting one for you because we're going to be talking all about logging. Now, if you're new to logging, that's totally fine, but I will tell you it's absolutely crucial when it comes to software development. The reason being, it allows us to troubleshoot and diagnose problems in our environments, applications, and services a heck of a lot easier than if we had no log data. On top of that, what it also can do is give us insight into our system health, such as whether the services or apps are up or down. And then, to add more, we also can fulfill security requirements like compliance to make sure that we have log data for a certain amount of time. We're able to complete audit reviews on the data and also just make sure that everything's the most secure it can be. Now, I've personally been working at an observability company for the last 3+ years, and what I can say is I've seen everything when it comes to logging. I've seen various use cases, various reasons why you absolutely need logging, but I'm not here to sell you on a vendor. I'm not here to tell you that there is one solution and you should only use that. Every tool has a purpose and you need to use the right tool for the right job, right? So if you are a team or you're a company, you should really go out there and vet all these vendors and try to understand what software fulfills your requirements and needs. With that being said, in today's video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up an open source solution, which is Grafana Loki. Now, I've been playing around with Grafana Loki for a little bit now, and what I can say in full transparency is I'm really digging it. What I really love about Loki from a business perspective is that it only indexes the metadata in which the log comes from. So things like the server or the file name, it doesn't index the entire log. So that really drives down cost, which I believe is the key thing when talking about logging, because if you know, log data can be very expensive. I believe Grafana is actually boasting that it's like 1/10,000th of the size if you were to actually index the log, but don't quote me on that. I just read it in an article. Solutions like OpenSearch are also great, but since it does index the full text in the log, it does become a little bit more intensive from an infrastructure perspective. So it becomes a little bit of a RAM hog sometimes, and you have to be able to manage your own OpenSearch clusters and really make it perform at scale, which can be a little bit of a headache. Now, from the developer side, I really do like the way Loki handles object storage. So the way in which your log data funnels, you can hook up something like S3, which is a really low cost object store, and you can just send your log data there. So I really like that fact. And then on top of that, I'm just a huge fan of Prometheus. I think it's the best infrastructure monitoring tool. I think it's the most backed CNCF project, or one of. And really, I don't think it's going anywhere. But the ability to hook up Prometheus with Grafana and also to hook up Loki with Grafana to be able to visualize, alert, build dashboards, I think that's a huge bonus and a huge plus. So you can kind of look at Loki like the logging version of Prometheus. Okay, so if that wasn't a sales pitch, I don't know what was. But enough of me gassing up Loki. Let's actually go ahead and install it both on my Mac locally and then in my Kubernetes environment or on my cluster to see how easy Loki really is to get up and running. So before we get started setting up Loki, the first thing we're going to do is look at the overview and how the architecture is set up here. So the first thing we're going to do is to install an agent that collects from our applications or a file path in our case. And then we're also going to download Loki and Grafana, which allows us to query and visualize. So Grafana Loki is going to be our server. Grafana is going to be how we visualize and query, and the agent is going to be how we forward the logs, which is Promtail. So first things first, let's install Loki and Promtail. If you go to the Grafana Loki GitHub, you'll see that in the latest version, which is 2.9.8 in this case, which was released on May 2nd of 2024, we're going to install the Darwin package for both Promtail and Loki. So if you scroll up, you'll see Loki, Darwin, AMD 64. Since I'm on Mac and I'm running an Intel chip, that's the architecture I'm going to be using. If I scroll down to Promtail and I look at Promtail, Darwin, AMD 64, that's also what I'm going to install here. For Grafana, it's a little bit different because Grafana has its own download page, and I chose the OSS model, or which is the open source, and then 11.0, which is the most recent, and then I chose Mac, which is my OS, and then I can either do this via homebrew or through a curl command in a tar, and you can see that if I run ls in my folder, I have these installed. So this is my Loki Darwin binary, my Promtail binary, and then my Grafana. So I have all three tools installed, and at this point, hopefully you do too, but if not, please go ahead and do the steps that I just kind of laid out. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is configure Loki. So if we go into the Loki overview and then we actually scroll down to configure on the left-hand side, you're going to see that there's a Grafana Loki configuration parameter. And if you look at the configuration examples can be found in the configuration examples, this is really what we're going to need. So what we'll do is we're just going to copy this. We're going to go into our terminal. And then in this directory where I have all my binaries, I'm going to actually create a Loki config.yaml. And then I'm going to open this up in Vim. If you want to use Visual Studio Code or Sublime or anything you want, go ahead and use that, but I'm going to use Vim. So I'm going to paste this in here, and you're going to see that we're all sitting on port 3100 for Loki. The instance address is going to be the local host. We're going to do an in-memory KV store. We set a path prefix, we set a schema config. This is all very standard stuff when it comes to Loki. And then you can also see the object store. In this case, is going to be the file system. You could change this to S3 if you wanted to, but in this case, let's just keep it the file system. So I'm going to save this file, run WQ, and then I'm going to start up Loki. So in order to do that, all I have to do is run /Loki, and then I'm going to say -config.file, which is a flag, and then I'm going to pass in my Loki config file. So I'm going to run Loki-config.yaml. And then this will run, and it's going to say it can't be opened because Apple cannot check it for malicious software. In this case, all you have to do is go into private security, and then allow anyway, and then rerun it, and then it'll ask me to open it, and I'll allow connections coming in, and then you can see Loki started. So I'm going to move myself over so we can see more of the terminal here. But you can see that everything's running as expected. So how to actually access Loki, what we're going to do is we're going to go to 127, and then we're going to go to 3100, and then we're going to do dash metrics. If you go to the dash metrics on 3100 in your browser, you're going to see that there's metrics coming through, and that should give you some sort of indication that Loki is indeed running. Now what we have to do is we have to run Promtail. So Promtail is going to forward the log data to Loki, which is on 3100. So how do we do that? Well, if we go into configure Promtail, you're going to see that there is indeed a YAML that needs to be passed as well. So very similar to what we did with Loki, we need to do with Promtail. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new tab. We're going to go into that folder again. So I'm going to go cd Grafana Loki, and then I'm going to run ls, and then we're going to create a Promtail config.yaml. So now that we have our Promtail config created, what we're going to do is we're going to vi into Promtail config.yaml, and then we are going to actually paste a snippet that I already created into this file. And you're going to see that we define a HTTP listen port of 9080. This means this is what Promtail is going to be listening on. Now there is a positions file, which means this is going to keep track of the last scraped log line for Promtail. Now it's important that we do this because if not, it won't know where to read from, and it's just not going to be able to keep record. So we need that positions file. Next is the client. As mentioned before, we already are running Loki on 3100, so Promtail is going to be able to point to that, and it's actually going to push out to our Loki instance. Then we're defining our scrape config. This is very similar to a Prometheus scrape config, where we're defining our job name, which is just system. We have a target of localhost. We're defining a label, and we can call this whatever we want. Let's actually change this from var logs to something else. This is going to be a label passed through in the actual config itself. So when we see this in Loki, we're going to be able to query for this label, and we're going to say job, and let's just call this Loki test log. And then we're actually going to change this path as well. I'm not going to read from var log. I'm actually going to read from users, Sean Pitts, and then I'm going to do Grafana Loki. Actually, Sean Pitts development logs, and then I'm going to do loki.log. And you can see that if I run pwd here, this is actually a path in which I have a test log called Loki logs. So we're going to rock with that. And then we're going to save this file, and then we are going to run Promtail. So if we go Promtail, and then we pass our -config.file. This is executing the binary of AMD64, which we installed, and then we're passing our Promtail config. Let's run enter. Now we can see Promtail already working, which is great. So now let's go to Grafana and hook up this Loki data source to see this log data coming through. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open one more file directory, and we're going to go into cd Grafana Loki one more time, and then we're going to go into cd Grafana version 11. In here, you'll see that there is a bin directory. So we're going to go cd bin, and then we're going to start the Grafana server. So all we have to do is run /Grafana server, and then I'll say, please use or update all uses of Grafana and blah, blah, blah. And then we'll allow incoming connections. And then what we can do is we can go to localhost 30,000 or 3,000, I apologize. And then it's going to bring us to a login page. We'll have to type in admin and then admin, and it's going to ask us for a new password. So I just created a new password. Now I've logged in, and now we have Grafana up and running. So now in my connections, we can see that there is data sources, and what we're going to want to do is add a new data source. We're going to look for Loki. We're going to click on Loki, and then we're going to set our localhost to 3100 to be able to collect this data from our Loki instance, right? Because we already have it running on 3100. So now when we do save and test, you're going to see the data sources successfully connected. And then what we can do now is go into Explore and actually query for these logs in Loki. So we should, if everything's working, see filters or labels coming through. Now we can see that there's a file name. And then if we look at random.log or loki.log, these are actually coming through. Let's run this query, and we can see that I'm getting all of my log data. So that's pretty cool, right? Now we can say that there's log data coming through. I have a couple labels. But what if I actually want to go one step further and parse this out? Well, that's a great question. And the answer to that is pipeline stages. Now, in order to configure a pipeline stage, what you need to do is go into Grafana's documentation under Promtail and click on pipeline stages. And there's going to be an option to pass what's called a regex. Now, a regex is a text matcher that allows you to extract labels or in other logging solutions fields that kind of make your data structured. So what we'd be doing in this case is taking get, health, and 400 and actually making that into something more legible that we can actually use and filter on. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a regex for this by going into the terminal, and we are going to go and run cat promtail config.yaml, and you're going to see that I actually added a pipeline stage already in here. Now this pipeline stage just as a regex expression, and I use ChatGPT for this. I've written so many regexes in my days, but I wanted to speed this up a little bit. So I use ChatGPT, and hopefully this works. If it doesn't, we're going to refactor it to work. But essentially you can use it for that. And what it's going to do is it's going to parse out timestamp, method, route, and then it's also going to do status code, but it's actually going to add labels of method, route, and status code, which we parsed out. So now if we restart the Promtail service and run this, we should start to forward these logs again, and hopefully they come in with the proper labels. So if I refresh Grafana again, and then I look for the method, you can see now that I actually do get these in. And if I run the query get, you can see that we're actually getting these in, which is pretty solid, right? So my data is now parsed, and that is Loki in a nutshell. Now, let's move on to Kubernetes and figure out how to deploy it via Helm. All right, now when talking about Kubernetes, let's first discuss what my environment looks like. So if I run kubectl get nodes, you're going to see that I'm running a 3-node cluster, and these are EKS or EC2 nodes. These are virtual machines or virtual instances through Amazon Web Services, and they're called EC2 instances. You can also run this locally if you want to do it via Kind, Minikube, Docker Desktop, and so forth. There's a couple more solutions out there for it, but essentially I'm using AWS. And these represent virtual nodes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Helm install or Helm repo add, and we're going to add the Grafana repo from Helm. So when we run this, you're going to see it already exists because I do have this installed. Now if I run Helm repo list, you're going to see that Grafana is already added there. And then what I can do is I can search for all the repos in the Helm repo Grafana. So I'm going to do Helm search repo, and I'm going to do Loki. So I'm going to look for every repo that has Loki in it, and you're going to see that there's a bunch. There's Grafana Loki, the Loki stack, the distributed, the canary, the simple scalable, and these are all different versions of it, but what I'm going to run is the Loki stack. So how do I actually run this, and how do I see what I'm going to be running? Well, if I run helm show values, and then I do Grafana -Loki stack, and then I pipe this out to a values.yaml, and then I do cat values.yaml. You're going to see this is everything that's added from the Helm chart and gives us at our disposal. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to VI into this, and I'm going to do values.yaml. And then we're going to go down and look at what this does. So we have Loki enabled, which is true. It's going to include it on port 3100, just like we did in the local installation Promtail. This is actually running on 3101 in this case. And then what we can see here is that we have FluentBit enabled, set to false, Grafana set to false as well. Now we don't want that to be the case, right? We actually want Grafana to be set to true. So we're going to set that to be true. And then instead of the image here, we don't want this to be 10.3.3. We actually are going to set this to be the latest. And the reason is if we're running like Grafana version 11, which just came out, we'd want the latest version. We don't want older versions, right? However, if you're running this in a production environment, I do recommend that you actually make sure it doesn't break anything before just updating your version or your image. So now that we have this and we should be all good, we have logstash set to false, filebeat false, Prometheus set to false, but you can see that these are all the options that we have at our disposal, and these should start to send data in. So if we actually go up to, let's go way up here, and then we can see the Grafana Promtail is enabled, so everything should be good there. So now what we want to do is we actually want to install this. So we're going to run helm install, and then we're going to pass a values file, which is our values.yaml, and then we're going to name our release, and it's going to be called Loki, and then we're going to pass the Grafana Loki stack, and then we're going to install that, and you're going to see that we get a Loki, or a name of Loki, and that it was deployed on the default namespace. We could have defined a different namespace for this, but then when we run kubectl get all, you're going to see that we get a lot of stuff installed along with the Loki stack. So we get our Kubernetes service, our Grafana, our Loki service, and this is what we're actually going to port forward to be able to access Grafana. And then you can see here that we have pods running like Promtail. We actually have 3 instances of Promtail running for high availability. We have 1 instance of Grafana, or it actually looks like we might have 2 in this case, and then we have Loki running as well. On top of that, we have a daemon set, so this deploys a copy of the pod to every node if you're unfamiliar with daemon sets. So this means that every node that's spun up, let's say we need to scale up our cluster, we're going to now have Promtail running on that as well. And on top of that, we have a replica set. So this is why with Grafana you see 2 replicas running. That's because we define a replica set, and I assume that we have 2 in there. And then we also have a stateful set defined for Loki. So now, what if I want to access Grafana? Everything should be running and sending Kubernetes data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run kubectl port forward, and then I'm going to say svc/, which stands for service, and then I'm going to say Loki Grafana, and then I'm going to say 3000, and then 80, because I think it is running on 80 TCP. So if we run this, now we're going to see that we actually have this working. So if we go into our local browser and open up 3000, we should be able to log in, and we're going to do admin, and then if we pass our password, to actually get the password, what we need to do is open up a new tab, and we need to run a kubectl get secret. And then you can see that there is the Loki Grafana secret that we need to pass. And you can see this by saying kubectl get secrets. And then you'll see that there's a Loki Grafana secret. But in order to be able to get the password that it gives us out of the box, we're going to run this command, and it's actually going to give us a passcode. Now we're going to punch this into our password, and we're going to be able to log into Grafana. Now, if we go into Explore, you're going to see that we already have a Loki instance running because it hooks up automatically to Grafana with the Loki stack. So when we search for the filters, we're going to see app, container, file name, instance, job, namespace, and so forth. So if I want to actually look for a specific container here, and maybe I want to look at the Promtail, and I want to see what's going on here and all the logs that are coming through, you can see that I'm actually getting connection refused on a lot of these. But if, let's say, I wanted to look for another, let's say, namespace, and I wanted to look at the kube system namespace specifically, I can start to get the logs for that. So this is really how easy it is to get up and running with Kubernetes. Now, if you wanted to extend this functionality and start to add like your own pipelines, or you wanted to add in different sources, you would have to go and modify the values.yaml to be able to do so. But this should get you up and running. So that's a video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.